What if I told you that in the year 1147, deep in the forests of medieval France, a simple peasant made a discovery that would challenge everything the Church had taught for over 1,000 years? What if the greatest secrets about Jesus Christ, about the true nature of heaven itself, were not lost to time, but deliberately hidden? The story I'm about to share with you will send chills down your spine. It's a revelation so profound, so earth-shattering, that it forces us to question not just what we've been told about our faith, but about the very nature of reality itself. Before we dive into this incredible tale, make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Trust me, after what you're about to hear, you won't want to miss a single story that could change how you see the world forever. The Kingdom of Francia, 1147. The Second Crusade rages in distant lands, while back home, the common people struggle under the weight of feudal obligations and unwavering church doctrine. It was a time when questioning God's appointed representatives on earth meant certain death, when the Inquisition's flames waited for anyone who dared to think beyond prescribed beliefs. But sometimes the universe has other plans. In the village of Montclair, nestled between rolling hills and ancient oak forests, lived a peasant named Thomas of the Wood. At 32 years old, Thomas was known throughout the village not just for his skill with crops and livestock, but for his unwavering devotion to God. Every morning before dawn, he would kneel in his modest cottage and pray with such fervor that his neighbors often heard his whispered supplications through their thin walls. Thomas was a man caught between two worlds, his deep personal relationship with the divine and the increasingly harsh demands of the local abbey. Father Benedict, the village priest, had grown suspicious of Thomas's independent spirit. While Thomas donated generously to the church and attended every service without fail, he had begun asking uncomfortable questions during confession. Questions about why God allowed such suffering among the poor, why miracles seemed to have ceased, and why the wealthy monks lived in luxury while children starved. Perhaps Father Benedict had warned him just weeks earlier. "Thomas, you think too much for a simple farmer. Remember, Thomas, faith requires obedience, not understanding." But Thomas couldn't help himself. His relationship with God felt too real, too personal, to be confined within the rigid walls of doctrine. He sensed there was more to divine truth than what filtered down from Rome through the mouths of men who had never worked the soil or watched their children go hungry. It was on the night of November 15th, during the feast of St. Albert, that Thomas's world changed forever. He had been checking his livestock in the field beyond the village, a habit born of necessity as wolves had been troubling the area. The autumn air was crisp, and above him the stars seemed unusually bright and active. As he counted his sheep, a brilliant light suddenly streaked across the sky, far brighter than any shooting star he had ever witnessed. But this light didn't fade. Instead, it seemed to slow, descending toward the forest that bordered his property. Thomas watched in amazement as what appeared to be a star fell to earth, illuminating the treetops before disappearing with a sound like distant thunder. His practical nature warred with his curiosity. Wolves were dangerous enough at night, and who knew what evil might lurk in darkness? But something deeper called to him, a voice that seemed to whisper directly to his soul, "Go, see, this is why you were born." Thomas grabbed his walking stick and a small oil lamp and made his way toward the forest. Deep in the woods, he found a clearing he had never seen before, though he knew these paths like the lines on his weathered hands. At the center lay what appeared to be a vessel of some kind, smooth as polished silver, but warm to the touch and humming with an energy that made his teeth ache. And beside it, barely conscious, lay a being unlike anything in his darkest nightmares or wildest dreams. The creature was humanoid, but clearly not human. Its limbs were elongated and graceful. Its skin seemed to shimmer with its own inner light, and its eyes, when they fluttered open, held a depth of intelligence and compassion that took Thomas's breath away. It was wounded, a strange, luminescent fluid seeping from a gash along its side. Every fiber of Thomas's religious training screamed that this was a demon, a test sent by Satan himself. He should flee. He should alert the church. But then the being looked at him, and Thomas felt something he had never experienced in all his years of prayer and devotion. He felt truly seen, not judged, not measured, but simply and completely understood. The being's mouth didn't move, but Thomas heard a voice as clearly as if someone had spoken directly into his ear. The words came not as sound, but as pure meaning flowing directly into his consciousness. "Peace, Thomas of the wood, I mean you no harm." Thomas stumbled backward, nearly dropping his lamp. You know my name? Are you a demon sent to test me?" "I am neither demon nor angel, as your people understand such things. I am a traveler, a messenger, one whom your ancestors might have called a watcher. I have journeyed far to bring knowledge to your world, but my vessel was damaged by forces that would keep humanity in darkness." "Forces?" Thomas found his voice, though his hands shook. "What forces?" "Those who benefit from fear, from ignorance, from the separation of people from their divine heritage. My kind has walked among you before, Thomas. We were here when the one you called Jesus walked your earth. We were here when the first churches were built, and we have watched as truth was slowly buried beneath layers of control and dogma." Thomas felt his knees give way. He sank to the forest floor, staring at this impossible being. "This cannot be real. This is madness." "Your compassion drew you here, Thomas, not madness. I am dying, and I need sanctuary. I need someone with a pure heart and an open mind to help me heal. And in return," the being's eyes seemed to glow brighter, "in return, I will share with you truths that have been hidden from your people for over 1,000 years. Truths about the one you call Jesus Christ. Truths about the real nature of heaven. Secrets that your church has either forgotten or deliberately buried." Thomas felt his world tilting on its axis. Everything he thought he knew suddenly felt uncertain, like sand shifting beneath his feet. But something deeper than fear, deeper than his lifelong conditioning, recognized truth in this being's words. Against every rational thought in his head, Thomas found himself reaching out to help the wounded traveler to its feet. "Come," he whispered, "I have a place where you can heal." Thomas smuggled the being, who asked to be called Ashalel, into the abandoned root cellar beneath his cottage. It was here, by flickering candlelight, that his understanding of everything he had believed would be forever transformed. Over the course of 3 nights, as Ashalel's strength slowly returned, the being shared knowledge that shattered Thomas's conception of reality itself. "Tell me about miracles," Ashalel said on the first night, its voice now audible in the physical world, musical and layered with harmonics that seemed to resonate in Thomas's bones. "What do your priests teach you about the miracles of Jesus?" Thomas recited what he had learned since childhood, that Jesus was the Son of God, and through divine power he could violate the natural laws that bind ordinary men. He could heal the sick, raise the dead, walk on water, because he was divine in a way that we are not. Ashalel's expression, so alien yet somehow deeply familiar, showed what Thomas could only interpret as sadness. "Thomas, what if I told you that Jesus performed no miracles at all, and yet everything he did was miraculous?" I don't understand." "The one you call Jesus understood what your people have forgotten, that consciousness itself is the fundamental force of creation. What you call miracles were simply demonstrations of what happens when a being aligns completely with divine love, when they understand that the separation between mind and matter is an illusion." Ashiel gestured, and the dead flowers Thomas had placed in a bowl of water suddenly burst into bloom, their colors more vivid than any earthly flower he had ever seen. "This is not supernatural, Thomas. This is the natural state of a consciousness that remembers its true relationship with creation. Jesus didn't violate God's laws. He demonstrated them. The divine art, the sacred technology of consciousness itself." Thomas stared at the impossible flowers, his mind reeling. But the Church teaches that only Jesus could do such things because he was uniquely divine. And what does that teaching do to the common person, Thomas? Does it inspire them to discover their own divine nature? Or does it convince them they are helpless without intermediaries? The question hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. "Tell me about heaven," Ashiel continued on the second evening. "Where do your priests say it is located?" "Above us, in the clouds, where God sits on his throne, surrounded by angels. After death, if we have lived righteously and followed church doctrine, our souls ascend to this place of eternal reward." Ashiel was quiet for a long moment. When it spoke, its words carried a weight that seemed to press against Thomas's chest. "Thomas, what if heaven is not a place you go to after death, but a state of consciousness you can access right now? What if it's not above you, but within you? What if the kingdom of heaven that Jesus spoke of was never meant to be found in the sky, but in the depths of your own awakened awareness? Before Thomas could respond, Ashiel touched his forehead with one elongated finger. Suddenly, Thomas wasn't in the root cellar anymore. He stood in a realm of impossible beauty, where colors had sounds and thoughts took physical form. He saw beings of pure light moving through landscapes that shifted like living dreams. But more than the visual wonder, he felt a love so complete, so unconditional, that every moment of suffering in his life suddenly made perfect sense as part of a larger tapestry of growth and understanding. "This is heaven, Thomas," Ashiel's voice surrounded him. "Not a reward earned through obedience to earthly authorities, but your natural inheritance as a divine being having a human experience. It exists parallel to your physical world, separated only by the thinness of thought." When Thomas returned to ordinary consciousness, tears were streaming down his face.
"The greatest tragedy," Ashiel said on the final night of revelation, "is not what was lost, but what was deliberately obscured." Jesus came to teach humanity that every person carries divine spark within them. He demonstrated that love, focused with absolute faith, could heal, could create, could transform reality itself. His message was that the kingdom of heaven was at hand, not in some distant future, but in the eternal now of awakened consciousness.
"Then why," Thomas struggled with the words, "why does the church teach something different?"
"Because, Thomas, institutions survive by being necessary. If people knew they could commune directly with the divine, if they understood that heaven was their birthright rather than something to be earned through earthly authorities, what would happen to the power structures that have been built on their ignorance?" Thomas felt something crumble inside his chest. Not his faith, but the cage that had contained it. Jesus spoke of love, unity, direct divine relationship. But over the centuries, those in power transformed his message into one of separation, judgment, and dependence on earthly hierarchies. They took the most liberating truth ever offered to humanity and turned it into another form of bondage.
"But," Thomas whispered, "if what you say is true, then the church—"
"The church contains many good people, Thomas. People like you who genuinely seek divine truth. But the institution itself has become something Jesus would not recognize. It has become the very thing he spoke against, a system that places barriers between people and their divine nature." On the fourth morning, Thomas woke in a state of profound turmoil. The revelations of the past 3 nights had left him feeling as though the ground had been pulled from beneath his feet. He sat in his cottage, staring at the crucifix that had belonged to his father, and felt the weight of a terrible choice pressing down upon him. Was this being truly a divine messenger, or was he being deceived by the most cunning demon ever to walk the earth? Everything Ashiel had shown him felt true in his heart, more true than anything he had ever experienced. The love he had felt in that vision of heaven, the sense of connection with the divine that needed no intermediary, the understanding that consciousness itself was sacred. It all resonated with something deep inside him that he always had known but had never been allowed to express.
But a lifetime of conditioning warred against this knowing. The priests had always taught that such thoughts were Satan's greatest deception, that he would appear as an angel of light to lead the faithful astray. What if Thomas was committing the ultimate heresy? What if, by listening to a Shale, he was damning not just himself, but anyone who might be influenced by this knowledge? He thought of Father Benedict's warnings about thinking too much. He thought of the Inquisition's fires, of the screams of heretics as their flesh burned for the glory of God. He thought of his neighbors who trusted him, who might be led astray if he shared what he had learned. Thomas fell to his knees before the crucifix, praying with a desperation he had never felt before. God, if this is a test, please give me strength to resist. If this being is truly your messenger, please show me a sign I cannot doubt. I am just a simple man, and I cannot bear the weight of choosing between my salvation and what feels like the greatest truth I have ever encountered. But the crucifix remained silent, and Thomas remained torn between two realities that seemed impossible to reconcile. For hours he knelt there, weeping, begging for clarity that didn't come. Finally, as the sun reached its zenith, he made his decision. He would ask a Shale to leave. He would confess his sin to Father Benedict and accept whatever penance was required. He would choose the safety of orthodox belief over the dangerous beauty of forbidden knowledge. But as he descended into the root cellar to deliver this news, he found a Shale clearly dying. The alien's light had dimmed to barely a flicker, and its breathing was shallow and labored. "Thomas," a Shale whispered, "I sense your turmoil. You believe I may be a deceiver." Thomas knelt beside the alien, guilt and confusion warring in his chest. I don't know what to believe. Everything you've shown me feels true, but I've been taught that Satan's greatest trick is making lies feel like truth." Ashayan's eyes, though dimmed, still held that infinite compassion. "Then let me ease your suffering, my friend. Let me show you something that will remove all doubt about my nature and purpose." What happened next would remain etched in Thomas's memory until his dying day.
A shawl, summoning strength from some reserve Thomas couldn't fathom, slowly raised its hand toward Thomas's left arm. For 15 years, Thomas had carried a wound there, a deep gash from a scythe accident that had never properly healed, that ached constantly and limited his ability to work. It was his secret shame, this weakness he couldn't afford to acknowledge. "How do you know about this?" Thomas breathed, for he had never spoken of it to anyone. "Because, Thomas, love sees everything and judges nothing." A shawl's palm hovered inches from the old wound, and Thomas felt heat unlike anything he had ever experienced. Not the harsh heat of fire, but the warm, nurturing heat of summer sunlight, of a mother's embrace, of divine love made manifest. The heat seemed to penetrate not just his flesh, but his very soul. And then, impossibly, the scar began to fade. Thomas watched in amazement as flesh that had been twisted and discolored for 15 years became smooth and healthy. The constant pain that had been his companion vanished as if it had never existed. When a shawl finally lowered its hand, Thomas's arm was completely whole. But this was only the beginning. "Look," a shawl whispered, directing Thomas's attention to the corner of the cellar where a small plant had withered and died from lack of sunlight. As Thomas watched, the dead leaves began to brighten, stems strengthened, and new growth appeared as if spring had suddenly arrived in that small, dark space. "Thomas," a shawl said, its voice growing stronger, "I need you to understand something crucial. This is not magic. This is not supernatural power. This is simply what happens when consciousness aligned with divine love encounters the physical world. This is what Jesus demonstrated every day of his ministry. This is what every human being is capable of when they remember their true nature." Thomas stared at his healed arm, at the flourishing plant, feeling something fundamental shift in his understanding. But how? How is this possible? Because, my friend, what you call reality is far more fluid than you have been taught. Matter responds to consciousness. Physical form follows spiritual intent. When Jesus healed the sick, he was not violating natural law, he was demonstrating it. He was showing people that limitation and suffering are not God's will, but simply the result of forgetting our divine heritage.
There is something else I must show you, Thomas. Something that will prove beyond any doubt that I come in the name of the same divine love that sent Jesus to your world. Ashael's eyes began to glow with renewed intensity, and suddenly Thomas felt the now familiar sensation of his consciousness expanding beyond the confines of his physical body. But this time, he didn't find himself in the beautiful realm that he had visited before. Instead, he stood in what appeared to be his own cottage, but somehow transformed, brighter, more vivid, as if he were seeing it through clearer eyes. And there, sitting at his wooden table with a smile of infinite love, was his wife. Margaret had died in childbirth 7 years earlier, along with their unborn son. Her death had nearly destroyed his faith entirely, and the pain of her loss was the wound that no earthly physician could heal. "Thomas," she said, her voice exactly as he remembered it, "my beloved husband." Thomas felt his knees give way, but in this space he didn't fall. Instead, he found himself somehow supported by the very air around him. "Margaret, is this real? Are you really here, or am I losing my mind?" Her laugh was like music, like spring water over stones, like every beautiful sound he had ever heard. "I am as real as I ever was, my love. Death is not an ending. It's just stepping from one room into another. I have been waiting for you to be ready to see me again." But the priest said, "They said you were in purgatory, suffering for your sins, waiting for enough prayers and indulgences to—" "Thomas," her voice was gentle but firm, "listen to me carefully. I have never suffered a moment since leaving my body. I have never been separated from God's love. I have never needed anyone else's prayers or payments to earn my way into heaven. the moment I left my physical form, I found myself embraced by the same infinite love that this messenger has shown you." She gestured toward Ashael, who Thomas realized had somehow appeared in this vision space as well. "This being speaks truth, Thomas. The divine spark that Jesus came to awaken is real. The kingdom of heaven that he spoke of exists, and it is your birthright. No institution, no matter how powerful, can keep you from it if you choose to claim it." Margaret reached across the table and took his hands in hers. Her touch felt completely real, completely present.
The love we shared in life continues, Thomas. It always will. And the love that connects us is the same love that connects all beings to the divine source. This is what Jesus came to teach. This is what the Church has forgotten in its hunger for earthly power. What should I do, Marguerite? How can I live with this knowledge? Live it, my beloved. Don't just believe it, become it. Let the love that created you shine through you. Heal when you can, comfort when you can, and remember that every person you meet carries the same divine spark, whether they know it or not. As the vision began to fade, Marguerite spoke one final time. "Trust this messenger, Thomas, and trust yourself. The truth you've discovered is not a threat to genuine faith. It's the fulfillment of it." When Thomas returned to ordinary consciousness, he was a changed man. The doubt, the fear, the agonizing uncertainty that had tormented him were gone, replaced by a peace deeper than anything he had ever imagined possible. He looked at Ashael, now clearly recovering, its light brightening with each passing moment, and felt not amazement, but gratitude. "I understand now," he said simply. "You haven't come to destroy my faith. You've come to set it free." Ashael smiled, an expression that somehow conveyed joy across the vast difference in their physical forms. Faith without freedom is not faith at all, Thomas. It is merely obedience. Jesus came to free humanity from spiritual slavery, not to create new forms of it. Over the following weeks, as Ashael's strength fully returned, Thomas learned more than he had in all his previous years of religious instruction. He learned that prayer was not begging for divine intervention, but aligning his consciousness with divine will. He learned that healing was not a supernatural gift reserved for saints, but a natural result of love focused with absolute faith. Most importantly, he learned that his relationship with the divine required no intermediary, no institution, no earthly authority whatsoever. But perhaps the most profound transformation was in how Thomas saw his fellow human beings. Where at once he saw simple peasants, struggling sinners, people divided by class and station, he now saw divine beings temporarily wearing human costumes. The spark that he had discovered within himself was present in every person he met, whether they knew it or not. When the time came for Ashael to leave, its vessel repaired through means Thomas couldn't begin to comprehend, the being left him with a final gift and a sacred charge. "Thomas," Ashael said as they stood together in the forest clearing where their journey had begun,
What you have learned must not die with you, but neither can it be shouted from the rooftops. The world is not yet ready for such truth to be openly proclaimed. Those who profit from humanity's spiritual ignorance would quickly silence such a voice. From within its vessel, Ashael produced what appeared to be a simple wooden box. But when Thomas touched it, he felt the same warm energy that had healed his arm. This contains knowledge, Thomas, not just what I have shared with you, but teachings from others of my kind who have walked among humanity throughout your history. Some of it was given to the one you call Jesus, some to teachers in distant lands whom your people have never heard of. All of it points toward the same truth, that every human being is a divine spark having a temporary physical experience. What am I to do with this? Live by what you have learned. Let your example plant seeds in the minds of those ready to receive them. And when the time is right, when you find others whose hearts are open to truth, share what you can. Create a hidden network of those who remember humanity's true heritage. As Ashael's vessel rose silently into the star-filled sky, he felt not sadness at the parting, but anticipation for the work ahead. Thomas became known throughout the region as a man of unusual wisdom and compassion. He never spoke openly of his encounter with Ashael, but those who knew him sensed something different about him. His crops flourished in drought years. Sick animals brought to him often recovered mysteriously. Children who played near his cottage spoke of feeling safer, happier, somehow lighter in his presence. More importantly, Thomas gathered others who, like him, had grown disillusioned with the church's emphasis on fear and control. These men and women, farmers, craftsmen, even some low-ranking clergy, formed what they called the Circle of the True Light. They met in secret, sharing what Thomas had learned, practicing the divine art of consciousness aligned with love, and slowly, carefully, spreading the understanding that every human being was infinitely more than they had been taught to believe.
Live by what you have learned. Let your example plant seeds in the minds of those ready to receive them. And when the time is right, when you find others whose hearts are open to truth, share what you can. Create a hidden network of those who remember humanity's true heritage. Ashael's eyes seemed to look directly into Thomas's soul. One day, Thomas, the time will come when this knowledge can be freely shared, when the institutions that have kept humanity in spiritual darkness will crumble under the weight of awakening consciousness. When that day comes, the seeds you plant now will bloom into a garden of liberation. As Thomas watched Ashael's vessel rise silently into the star-filled sky, he felt not sadness at the parting, but anticipation for the work ahead. Thomas became known throughout the region as a man of unusual wisdom and compassion. He never spoke openly of his encounter with Ashael, but those who knew him sensed something different about him. His crops flourished in drought years. Sick animals brought to him often recovered mysteriously. Children who played near his cottage spoke of feeling safer, happier, somehow lighter in his presence. More importantly, Thomas quietly gathered others who, like him, had grown disillusioned with the church's emphasis on fear and control. These men and women, farmers, craftsmen, even some low-ranking clergy, formed what they called the Circle of the True Light. They met in secret, sharing what Thomas had learned, practicing the divine art of consciousness aligned with love, and slowly, carefully, spreading the understanding that every human being was infinitely more than they had been taught to believe.
When Thomas died, at the age of 67, those who had learned from him carried the knowledge forward. The circle survived, hidden but growing through the centuries of inquisition and religious war. They taught that Jesus' true message had never been about creating another religion, but about freeing humanity from all religious bondage. They passed down the understanding that heaven was not a distant reward, but a present reality, accessible to anyone willing to look beyond the illusions of separation and fear. And they waited, generation after generation, for the time when the world would be ready to hear these truths openly. That time, according to the ancient prophecies hidden within Ashael's gift, would come when the old institutions of spiritual control began to crumble under their own contradictions, when people began to awaken to their divine heritage regardless of what earthly authorities commanded them to believe. According to those same prophecies, that time is now. The questions that Thomas faced in that medieval forest are the same questions we face today. In our age of unprecedented access to information, we're discovering that many of the stories we were told about history, about spirituality, about the very nature of reality itself, may not be the complete truth. What if the encounter between Thomas and Ashael wasn't unique? What if, throughout history, there have been those who tried to share the liberating truth that Jesus actually taught, that divine power isn't reserved for a chosen few, but is the birthright of every human being? What if the real message of Christ was never about creating another controlling institution, but about freeing humanity from all forms of spiritual slavery? The being that Thomas called Ashael spoke of a time when this hidden knowledge would emerge from the shadows, when people would begin to remember their true nature, regardless of what earthly authorities tried to convince them to believe. When the separation between science and spirituality, between mind and matter, between human and divine, would finally be recognized as the illusion it has always been.
Look around at our world today. We're living in an age when more people than ever are questioning institutional authority, when ancient spiritual practices are being validated by quantum physics, when the boundaries between what we once called possible and impossible are dissolving before our eyes. Perhaps the most profound truth hidden in Thomas's story is this: the divine power that Jesus demonstrated, the ability to heal with love, to create with focused consciousness, to transcend the limitations that seem so real, was never meant to be worshipped from a distance. It was meant to be embodied, practiced, lived. What do you believe? Have you ever felt a connection to a power beyond what you've been taught? Have you experienced moments
when love seemed to transcend the physical laws of reality? Have you sensed that there might be more to your own consciousness, your own divine nature than any institution has ever dared to tell you? The knowledge that Ashael shared with Thomas has never been lost. It has been preserved, passed down through hidden lineages of those who understood that true spiritual freedom cannot be contained within the walls of any building or the doctrines of any organization. And now, in this age of awakening, when the old structures of control are crumbling and people are rediscovering their connection to the divine, this ancient wisdom is emerging once again. If this story has resonated with something deep inside you, if you feel called to explore the possibility that you are far more than you've been taught to believe, then you're not alone. You're part of a growing awakening that spans every continent, every culture, every background. You're part of the fulfillment of the prophecy that Ashael shared with Thomas, that one day humanity would remember its true heritage. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced something that defied conventional explanation? Have you felt the presence of love so profound that it seemed to change physical reality? This community is a safe space to explore these experiences and to connect with others who are on the same journey of discovery. And if you're ready to dive deeper into these mysteries, subscribe to this channel and activate that notification bell. The stories of hidden history, of suppressed spiritual truths, of the real encounters between humanity and beings from beyond our world. These stories are emerging from the shadows. They're being shared by people who are no longer willing to let fear silence the truth. Share this video with someone who you think is ready to question everything. Share it with someone whose heart you know is open to the possibility that we've been taught only a fraction of what's actually true about our world, our history, and our own divine potential.
The age that Ashael prophesied, when humanity would remember its true nature, isn't coming. It's here. And you, by choosing to listen to this story, by remaining open to possibilities that challenge everything you thought you knew, are playing your part in the greatest awakening in human history. The truth, as Jesus himself said, will set you free. But first, you have to be willing to hear it.